I texted my family on my 33rd birthday, feeling shattered that no one remembered. My mother replied that they were better off without me and told me to never contact them again. My sister actually liked the message. My brother-in-law told me to grow up, so I granted their wish. I blocked their numbers. Then I logged into the private banking portal and completely froze their access to the family fortune they had been draining for years. The very next morning, I woke up to 147 missed calls and an alert that my mother had been publicly humiliated at a luxury boutique. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. My name is Maya, and I am a 33-year-old forensic accountant living in Chicago. Growing up in an affluent African-American family in Atlanta meant that maintaining a flawless public image was more important than actual love. My parents Beatrice and Marcus cared only about their standing at the country club and their position in our megachurch. I was always the scapegoat, the quiet daughter, who asked too many questions and refused to pretend everything was perfect. By contrast, my younger sister Chloe was the golden child. She became a lifestyle influencer, spending her days curating a fake billionaire persona online. Things worsened when Chloe married Connor, a white man who played the role of a successful venture capitalist. My parents practically worshipped Connor, believing his pedigree elevated our family status. They willfully ignored the fact that Connor had not held a real job in 4 years. On the evening of my 33rd birthday, I sat alone at my kitchen island in my Chicago apartment. The city lights sparkled outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, a view I had earned entirely through my own hard work. A single red velvet cupcake sat on a porcelain plate in front of me, a solitary candle burning down to the frosting. I stared at my phone screen. The family group chat labeled the Washingtons had been completely silent for weeks. Not a single message from my parents, not a word from my sister. I had spent the entire day throwing myself into complex financial data audits for my clients, trying to ignore the heavy ache in my chest. But as the clock struck 11 at night, the rejection felt too heavy to carry. Against my better judgment, I picked up my phone and typed a message. Today is my 33rd birthday. I waited all day hoping someone would remember. I guess I was wrong. I hit send and watched the message deliver. A small part of me, the wounded child who still craved her mother's affection, hoped for an immediate apology. I hoped someone would call and say they got caught up at church, or that they had been planning a surprise. Instead, my phone buzzed less than 2 minutes later. It was a reply from my mother, Beatrice. This family needs space, Maya. Your negative energy always drags everyone down, and we are exhausted from walking on eggshells around you. We are honestly better off without you. Do not contact us again. I stared at the screen as the words burned into my mind. Before I could even process the cruelty of my own mother discarding me on my birthday, another notification popped up. Chloe had reacted to our mother's message with a red heart icon. A moment later, Connor chimed in. Grow up, Maya. Let them breathe for once. A white man who lived entirely off my family wealth, telling me to grow up and leave my own parents alone. The audacity of his message hit me like a physical blow. For years, they had treated me like an annoying obligation, an embarrassing stain on their perfect social calendar. They assumed I was just a bitter career woman who envied their luxurious Atlanta lifestyle. What they did not know was that my late grandmother, Nana Josephine, had seen right through their superficial facade. She knew my parents were financially irresponsible, and she knew Connor was a grifter. 5 years ago, she secretly made me the sole trustee of the multi-million-dollar family trust. They thought the bank managed the money blindly. They had no idea I was the one approving every single dollar that funded their fake perfect lives. I did not cry. I did not type out a long emotional response defending my worth. I did not beg them to love me. The sadness that had been suffocating me all day instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold and absolute resolve. If they wanted space, I would give them the entire universe. I stood up and walked over to my home office desk. I opened my secure laptop and logged into the administrative portal for the Josephine Family Trust. The dashboard loaded, displaying the massive fortune my grandmother had built through decades of shrewd real estate investments. Below the main balance sat the linked accounts, the platinum credit lines my parents used for country club dues, the business account Connor used to fund his fake venture capital firm, and the unlimited spending card Chloe used to buy designer bags for her social media posts. I navigated to the controls and typed my authorization code. Without hesitation, I clicked the master control box asking to confirm the global freeze. I clicked confirm. The status icons instantly changed from active to frozen. The next morning, the bright Chicago sun woke me. I reached for my phone. The screen was flooded with exactly 147 missed calls. Mixed in with the missed calls was an automated security alert. Alert triggered. Beatrice Washington attempted transaction of $12,000 at Hermes. Transaction declined. Account frozen by trustee. I smiled, holding my coffee. I walked into the sleek glass lobby of my downtown Chicago accounting firm. The morning sun reflected off the polished marble floors as I greeted the security guards with a polite nod. My phone vibrated endlessly in my tailored suit pocket. I ignored it until I reached the safety of my corner office. Placing my briefcase on the mahogany desk, I finally pulled the device out. The missed call count had climbed to 212. I tapped the voicemail icon and hit speakerphone, leaning back in my leather chair. The voice of Marcus boomed through the quiet room. His tone was not just angry, but dripping with the kind of entitled rage I had endured my entire life. "Maya, you pick up this phone right now," he bellowed. "Do you have any idea what you did? Connor is at the dealership in Buckhead, trying to close on a custom Porsche 911. The general manager cut his card in half in front of the entire showroom. "Do you know how humiliating this is for our family? The pastor was there buying a car for his wife. You made your brother-in-law look like a broke fool in front of the most important people in Atlanta. Fix this bank glitch immediately." The next voicemail was from Beatrice, her voice pitched high with manufactured panic. "Maya, this is not funny. The bank teller had the nerve to tell me my platinum status was revoked. I am hosting the country club luncheon tomorrow. I need that account active. Call the bank and do your clerical job." I took a slow breath, opening my laptop. Clerical job. That was what they called my career as a senior forensic accountant, managing 8-figure portfolios. They convinced themselves I was just a glorified bank teller because accepting my actual power would mean acknowledging they relied on me. A third voicemail began playing. Marcus again, his voice escalating into a vicious roar. "You listen to me, you ungrateful child. You owe your brother-in-law respect. We sacrificed your college fund so he could launch that tech startup. We remortgaged our lives to give him seed money because he actually has the pedigree and connections to elevate this family name. You were supposed to step aside and let him lead. Now you want to throw a tantrum over a forgotten birthday and ruin his reputation. Unfreeze the account, or I will drive up there and drag you to the bank myself." I stopped the audio and stared at the city skyline outside my window. His words confirmed exactly what I had suspected for a decade. They had not just lost my college fund in a bad market crash as they claimed when I was 18. They handed my future to a mediocre white man who promised them a seat at the billionaire table. They forced me to take out crippling student loans to work 3 jobs while studying late into the night just so Connor could play CEO with my tuition money. And what did Connor build with my stolen future? Absolutely nothing. I clicked open a spreadsheet I had been maintaining for the past 5 years. It tracked every single transaction from the Josephine Family Trust. My grandmother had been a visionary real estate developer. When she passed away, she bypassed my parents completely because she knew their obsession with high society would drain her legacy. She made me the sole trustee. But my parents never accepted that reality. They manipulated the narrative, telling everyone, including Connor, that the trust was theirs, and I was merely the hired help handling the paperwork. I scrolled through the business expenses of Connor over the past 48 months. There were 0 returns. Instead, the spreadsheet showed a horrifying pattern of embezzlement disguised as venture capital. First-class flights to Ibiza, $5,000 charges at high-stakes poker tables, a monthly lease for a penthouse apartment downtown that Chloe knew nothing about. The Porsche was just the latest attempt to buy status with money he never earned. My parents were so desperate for white validation that they willingly funded his luxurious delusion while telling me I was the burden. My office phone rang, breaking the heavy silence. I glanced at the caller ID. It was Sarah, the front desk receptionist. I picked up the receiver, expecting a reminder about my 10 o'clock client meeting. Maya. Sarah said, her voice trembling with panic. There is a man down here demanding to see you. He bypassed the main security desk and he is screaming at the staff. Before I could ask for a name, a loud crash echoed through the receiver. Someone had just kicked over the expensive decorative vase in the waiting area. Then I heard a voice I recognized instantly. It was arrogant, loud, and dripping with unearned authority. I know she is up there. You tell that petty little accountant to come out here right now before I sue this entire building. I am family. You cannot keep me out. It was Connor. He had actually flown all the way from Atlanta to Chicago on a Tuesday morning just to throw a tantrum in my professional workspace. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my suit jacket. A cold rush of adrenaline pumped through my veins. For 33 years, I had lowered my gaze to keep the peace. I had absorbed their insults, swallowed their theft, and accepted my role as the family scapegoat. I had let them treat me like the help while they spent my inheritance. Those pathetic days of silent suffering were officially over right now. I picked up the thick, heavy legal binder containing the original trust documents and walked toward my office door. If Connor wanted to make a loud, public scene today, I was more than happy to oblige. I was about to give him the harsh reality check my parents had spent a decade paying. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of my suite and marched down the hallway. The usually pristine reception area of my firm was in absolute chaos. Sarah stood behind the marble desk, clutching her phone like a shield. Scattered across the rug were the shattered remains of a replica vase. Standing in the center of the debris was Connor. He wore his signature tailored blazer and expensive loafers. His face was flushed red with exertion and sheer entitlement. When he saw me step into the lobby, he did not apologize or lower his voice. Instead, he marched right up to me, pointing a manicured finger inches from my face. "It is about time you waddled out of your little cubicle," he snapped. He looked me up and down with a sneer of pure disdain. "I have been standing here for 20 minutes. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was to have my card declined in front of the dealership manager? You need to fix this system error right now." I stared at his finger. "Lower your hand, Connor. You are making a fool of yourself." Connor scoffed and crossed his arms over his chest. "Do not give me that aggressive attitude, Maya. You are overreacting as usual. Your parents already warned me you were throwing a tantrum over some missed birthday text. Look, I get it. You are lonely and bitter, but you do not get to play games with my livelihood just because you are having a bad week. I have real business to conduct. I have investors relying on me. I do not have time for your emotional outbursts. Get back to your little computer terminal, type in whatever administrative override code you use for your clerical job, and turn my cards back on." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a patronizing whisper. "Your parents pulled a lot of strings to get you this position. Do not bite the hand that feeds you. We all know you are just a diversity hire pushing papers around for the actual wealth managers. Know your place, Maya." The sheer audacity of his words hung in the quiet lobby. Sarah gasped from behind the desk. Connor stood tall, expecting me to shrink away or run to my office in tears. He truly believed the lies my parents had fed him. He believed I was just a low-level employee coasting on family coattails. He had absolutely no idea who he was dealing with. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I simply lifted the heavy leather-bound legal binder I had carried from my office and shoved it hard directly into his chest. Connor stumbled backward instinctively, wrapping his arms around the thick document to keep it from hitting the floor. "What is this garbage?" he demanded, struggling under the weight. "That is your reality check," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Open it to page 4. Read the highlighted section out loud." Connor rolled his eyes but flipped the binder open. His eyes scanned the dense legal jargon. I watched the color slowly drain from his cheeks as his gaze locked onto the bold text. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Go ahead, Connor," I urged, stepping closer. "Read the title under my name." He swallowed hard. "Sole trustee," he whispered. "Exactly," I said, snatching the binder back from his trembling hands. "I am not a clerical worker. I am not a paper pusher. I am the sole legal trustee of the Josephine Washington Family Trust. I do not work for the bank, Connor. I am the bank. I own the accounts. I control the assets. I approve the disbursements. Every single dollar you have spent over the past 4 years came directly from my authorization. I funded your fake venture capital firm. I paid for those designer loafers you are wearing. I am the reason you have not been living in a cardboard box." Connor backed away, his arrogant posture completely crumbling. He looked around the lobby as if hoping someone would tell him this was a massive prank. But there was only Sarah watching him with wide eyes, and me holding the keys to his entire existence. "Your fake business has generated zero revenue in 48 months, I continued, my voice echoing against the marble walls. "You have embezzled thousands to fund your luxury vacations and high-stakes poker games. You thought my parents were the gatekeepers to the wealth. You thought if you kissed up to Marcus and Beatrice, they would keep the money flowing forever. But my parents do not have a dime to their name. Nana Josephine left everything to me because she knew they were financially incompetent. She knew they would fall for a pathetic grifter like you." "You cannot do this," Connor stammered, his voice shaking. "I am your brother-in-law. We are family. Chloe will be devastated. Marcus will destroy you." "Marcus cannot do anything," I replied coldly. "He has no legal authority. The freeze is permanent. You will never see another cent from this family." For a brief moment, I thought I had completely broken him. Connor stood near the elevator banks, looking like a defeated child. But then a slow, sickening smirk spread across his face. The fear vanished, replaced by a dark, triumphant gleam in his eyes. He straightened his jacket and took a step back toward me. "You really think you hold all the cards, Maya?" He laughed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. He tapped the screen before holding it up for me to see. It was a scanned copy of a loan agreement. "You might be the sole trustee," Connor sneered, "but your idiot father is still the legal owner of that massive estate in Atlanta. 2 months ago, Marcus needed $5 million. I helped him secure a corporate loan. He pledged the trust as collateral. If you do not unblock my cards, the bank will seize their estate." I stared at Connor as his threat echoed through the marble lobby. He expected me to panic. He expected the dutiful daughter to scramble to the nearest computer and unlock his stolen lifestyle to save my parents from financial ruin. Instead, I signaled the 2 security guards standing near the elevator banks. They moved forward immediately, grabbing Connor by his tailored lapels. He thrashed against their grip, his smug smile melting into a mask of pure outrage. "You cannot do this!" he screamed as they dragged him toward the revolving glass doors. "They will lose the house, Maya. They will lose everything." I watched the heavy doors spin him out onto the Chicago pavement. I turned on my heel and walked straight back to my corner office, locking the door behind me. I did not waste a single second on anger. I sat at my desk and let my forensic accounting instincts take over. If Marcus had secured a $5 million corporate loan using an irrevocable trust as collateral, he would need the explicit legal authorization of the sole trustee. He would need my signature. I bypassed the standard banking dashboard and logged directly into the Federal Clearinghouse database using my firm credentials. I pulled the master file for the Washington estate. The documents loaded on my dual monitors in high resolution. There were 42 pages of complex loan origination forms filed exactly 8 months ago. I scrolled past the amortization schedules and the risk assessment, stopping dead at page 37. The notarized authorization agreement stared back at me. There on the bottom line was my name, Maya Washington. The signature was an almost perfect replica of my handwriting, but it was completely fake. The loop on the letter Y was too sharp. The pressure of the pen was too heavy. My father had not just taken out a reckless loan, he had committed federal bank fraud and forged federal documents to do it. The sheer arrogance of his crime took my breath away. He was so confident in my silent obedience that he forged my identity on a $5 million federal document, assuming I would never dare to investigate the family finances. He thought I was just the quiet girl who always cleaned up their messes. I printed the entire 42-page document, placed it in a secure folder, and grabbed my coat. I did not call the local police. Local cops would treat this like a domestic dispute, and my parents would simply charm their way out of it. I needed someone ruthless. 20 minutes later, I walked into the downtown offices of McAllister and Vance. Mac was a corporate litigator who specialized in white-collar crime and federal fraud. He was ruthless, brilliant, and possessed an absolute hatred for financial bullies. I dropped the folder onto his glass desk and told him to read page 37. Mac scanned the document, his eyes narrowing as he processed the legal implications. "Your father is a spectacular idiot," Mac said, leaning back in his chair. "He pledged a legally protected trust against a volatile corporate loan, and he forged the signature of a licensed forensic accountant to do it. This is not just a civil matter, Maya. This is a minimum of 10 years in federal prison." I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over the keypad. "So we call the authorities right now," I said. "I have the evidence. We shut them down today." Mac reached across the desk and gently pushed my hand down. "You do not want to call the local authorities, Maya. If you call the police today, Marcus will claim it was a misunderstanding. He will hire a defense team to say he had your verbal permission. He will stall and hide assets. We are going to let him dig his own grave." Mac opened a secure drawer and pulled out a blank federal form. "Instead of calling the police, we are going to file a confidential suspicious activity report directly with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It is called a SAR. The FBI handles wire fraud and federal bank forgery. By filing this report, you are legally protecting yourself as the trustee. But here is the beautiful part. The FBI will monitor his accounts silently. They will watch him scramble. They will document every single illegal transfer he makes to cover this defaulting loan. When the trap finally snaps shut, it will be a federal indictment, and there will be absolutely no escape." I stared at the blank federal form. The strategy was brilliant and devastating. If I froze the trust completely, Marcus would eventually miss the loan payments. He would default. The bank would move to seize his assets, and the FBI would be watching every desperate, fraudulent move he made to try and save his precious social image. I picked up the pen and filled out the suspicious activity report detailing my father's forgery and Connor's embezzlement. I handed the signed document back to Mac. "File it," I said. "Let them burn." I left Mac's office feeling a profound sense of clarity. For my entire life, my family had dictated the rules of engagement. They used emotional blackmail and financial abuse as their weapons of choice. Now they were playing on my battlefield, and they had no idea they were already surrounded. I drove back to my apartment, the city traffic blurring past my windows. I walked through my front door and dropped my keys onto the counter. The silence of my home was usually comforting, but tonight the air crackled with anticipation. I poured myself a glass of water and looked at the Chicago skyline. My phone began to vibrate on the Marble Island. I expected it to be Connor calling from another burner number, or Marcus screaming threats about frozen accounts. I picked up the device and looked at the screen. It was my mother Beatrice inviting me to an elite social gala. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone as it vibrated against the marble countertop. Beatrice Washington rarely called me unless she needed someone to blame or a check to clear. The timing was too perfect. I answered the call in silence. I just waited for the performance to begin. "Maya, darling." Beatrice cooed, her sickeningly sweet tone making my stomach turn. "I have been trying to reach you all morning. We have wonderful news." There was no mention of the 147 missed calls from earlier today. There was no acknowledgement of Marcus screaming at my receptionist. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She was going to pretend the entire morning had never happened. I leaned against the kitchen island, gripping the edge of the cold stone. "Hello, Mother," I replied, keeping my voice entirely flat. "You sent me a very specific message on my birthday. I believe you told me to never contact this family again." Beatrice let out a high-pitched theatrical laugh. "Oh, Maya, you always were so overly sensitive. That was just a silly misunderstanding. We were all stressed about the charity auction preparations, and you know how your father gets when he's under pressure. We certainly did not mean it. You took a moment of family tension and blew it completely out of proportion, as usual." I let her lie hang in the air. A younger and more foolish version of me would have immediately argued. I would have demanded real honest accountability. But the woman standing in this Chicago apartment knew better. They would never take accountability because they believed they were entitled to my silent submission. Anyway, Beatrice continued, brushing past my silence like dust off her designer coat. "We are hosting a massive Thanksgiving gala at the country club in Atlanta this weekend. The entire congregation will be there, along with the mayor and several prominent investors. We want you to fly down and join us." I raised an eyebrow. My parents never invited me to their high society events. They preferred to keep me hidden away in Chicago, out of sight, where my lack of a wealthy husband would not embarrass them. "Why the sudden change of heart?" I asked. "Why do you want me there now?" "Because we are celebrating your brother-in-law," she announced, her voice swelling with unearned pride. "Connor has achieved a massive business success. His venture capital firm just closed a monumental deal, and he is officially expanding his operations. We want the whole family together to honor his brilliance. It is going to be the social event of the season, and it would look incredibly suspicious if you were not standing in the family portraits." The audacity was truly breathtaking. Connor had not closed a single legitimate business deal in his life. He was drowning in offshore gambling debts and secretly bleeding the family trust dry. Yet my mother was throwing him a coronation at the most exclusive country club in the state. She was using the very money he was stealing to throw a party celebrating his imaginary genius. I took a slow sip of water. "I am very busy this week, Mother. I am not sure I can make the trip just to applaud Connor for his imaginary accomplishments." The line went dead silent for exactly 3 seconds. When Beatrice spoke again, the artificial sweetness had completely vanished, replaced by a sharp, venomous hiss. "Do not start this, Maya. Do not be jealous just because your sister found a successful man, while you sit alone in that cold apartment. You always do this. You ruin everything with your bitter attitude, just like when you ruined the debutante ball for Chloe." I closed my eyes as the old memory flashed through my mind. I was 19. Chloe was 16. She had sneaked out the night before her debutante ball, stolen our father's luxury sedan, and crashed it into a brick retaining wall. I took the blame. I told the police I was driving so she would not get a record and ruin her perfect societal debut. My parents grounded me for a year, stripped my savings to pay the damages, and paraded Chloe at the ball like a pristine angel. They knew the truth, but they chose the lie because the lie was prettier. They had blamed me for her mistakes for so long that they actually believed their own twisted narrative. "This is not a request, Maya." My mother barked, her voice echoing through the phone speaker. "You will book a flight to Atlanta. You will wear a tasteful dress. You will stand in the background of the photos, and you will smile while we celebrate the man who is actually elevating this family. You owe us this much. Do you understand me?" I listened to her ragged breathing through the receiver. She was desperate to maintain control, to pull me back into the obedient role they designed for me. She thought she was setting a trap to humiliate me in public, but she was blindly walking right into mine. The gala was the perfect stage. Every politician, church elder, and socialite they worshipped would be sitting in that room. It was the absolute perfect audience for what I needed to do next. I smoothed my hand over the cool marble countertop and allowed a faint smile to touch my lips. "You are right, Mother," I said, keeping my tone perfectly submissive and quiet. "I have been very selfish lately. I will book my flight tonight. I would not miss this family celebration for anything in the world." Beatrice let out a smug, triumphant sigh, completely satisfied with her victory. "That is a good girl. See you on Thursday." She ended the call without another word. I lowered the phone and immediately opened a new text message addressed to my cutthroat attorney, Mac. I typed quickly, "Draft the foreclosure notices. I am serving them at dinner." 2 days later, I stepped out of a black town car and handed my keys to the valet at the Peachtree Hills Country Club. The crisp November air in Atlanta smelled of expensive cigars and pine. I smoothed the skirt of my emerald silk gown and gripped the leather portfolio tucked securely under my arm. Inside those thick sealed envelopes were the foreclosure notices Mac had drafted with ruthless precision. I walked through the mahogany doors and handed my coat to an attendant. The ballroom was a masterclass in manufactured opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over tables draped in heavy white linen. This was the pinnacle of Atlanta society. State senators mingled by the towering ice sculptures. Prominent church elders stood near the open bar laughing loudly with real estate moguls. This was the exact crowd my parents had spent 30 years desperately trying to impress. To my right, a ring light illuminated a corner of the ballroom. Chloe stood posed in a sequined gown, holding her phone high above her head. She was live streaming the event to her 500,000 followers, pouting her lips and twirling a flute of champagne. "We are just so blessed," she cooed into the camera, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Connor has been working so hard on his new expansion, and tonight is all about celebrating generational wealth." She panned the camera across the room, ignoring my presence. A few feet away, Connor was holding court with the mayor and two bank executives. He wore a velvet tuxedo jacket and a confident grin. He threw his head back in laughter, clapping the mayor on the shoulder as if they were old fraternity brothers. He was playing the role of the financial savior, the brilliant entrepreneur elevating the Washington family name. It was a flawless performance, funded entirely by the trust he was actively draining. I bypassed the handshaking and made my way to the seating chart displayed on a gilded easel. My parents had placed themselves at the head table with Connor, Chloe, and the most powerful politicians in the room. I traced my finger down the list of names until I found mine. Table 24. I navigated through the maze of silk and chiffon until I reached the very back of the ballroom. My assigned seat was tucked behind a floral arrangement directly next to the swinging kitchen doors. Waiters rushed past me, carrying trays of appetizers. The clatter of silverware and loud kitchen orders drowned out the string quartet playing near the front. They had put me in the corner, hoping I would stay invisible while they spent my inheritance. I sat down, placing the leather portfolio on my lap. I did not feel humiliated. I felt dangerously calm. Every time the kitchen doors swung open, brushing against the back of my chair, it sharpened my resolve. For 2 hours, I sat in the shadows and watched the delusion unfold. Waiters poured vintage wine. Courses of filet mignon and roasted quail were served on gold-rimmed plates. My father, Marcus, worked the room like a seasoned politician. He moved from table to table, shaking hands and accepting congratulations on his son-in-law's massive success. Beatrice trailed right behind him, flashing her diamond necklace and whispering gossip to the wives of the church elders. They were selling a fantasy of infinite wealth to the highest bidders in the city. They had no idea their entire empire was built on a forged signature that was currently sitting on the desk of an FBI investigator. I took a slow sip of sparkling water and waited. I knew exactly how my family operated. They could never just throw a party and eat in peace. They needed a spectacle to cement their status. Just as the dessert plates were cleared, the sharp clink of silver against crystal cut through the low hum of conversation. Marcus stood at the head table holding his glass high. The string quartet stopped playing. 200 wealthy guests turned their attention to the front of the room. Chloe instantly angled her phone to capture her father, live streaming his moment of glory to the internet. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Marcus boomed, his voice echoing through the microphone. "We are gathered here to celebrate family legacy and the brilliant future of my son-in-law, Connor." Thunderous applause rippled through the room. Connor stood up briefly, offering a humble wave before sitting back down with a self-satisfied smirk. "But tonight is also about unity." Marcus continued, gesturing broadly. For too long, my eldest daughter Maya has been isolated up in Chicago working a stressful job away from her family. We want to bring her home. Maya, sweetheart, come up here. Every head in the ballroom swiveled toward the back corner. The bright spotlight shifted, cutting through the dim lighting and landing squarely on my face. The whispers started immediately as people craned their necks to look at me. I stood up, picking up my leather portfolio, and walked slowly through the sea of decorated tables. My heels clicked steadily against the polished hardwood floor. When I reached the head table, Marcus pulled a thick legal document from his breast pocket. He held it up high for the crowd to see, flashing his perfect blinding smile. We are officially promoting Maya to the executive board of Connor's venture capital firm, Marcus announced to the cheering room. We are keeping the wealth in the family. He turned to me and thrust the document into my hands, along with a gold-plated pen. Sign it right here, Maya, he whispered through gritted teeth, his public smile never wavering. Let everyone see us come together. I looked down at the paper. It was not a corporate promotion. It was a legally binding transfer of power. Hidden beneath the celebratory legal jargon was a single devastating clause surrendering my total authority as sole trustee completely over to Connor. I stared at the thick, heavy cream paper resting in my hands. The words swam before my eyes, before my training locked everything into sharp clinical focus. This was a deed of relinquishment. My father had masked a hostile takeover as a benevolent family promotion. The crowd was still applauding, while Chloe kept her phone angled to broadcast my supposed triumph. Marcus leaned over, wrapping a heavy arm around my shoulders. To the politicians and church elders watching it, looked like an embrace of pure paternal pride. But his fingers dug into my collarbone with enough force to leave deep purple bruises. Sign the paper, Maya, he murmured. His deep voice was a harsh, raspy whisper meant only for my ears. Do not dare make a scene here. You are going to smile. Sign your name and step down gracefully right now. I turned my head slightly to look at him. His jaw was clenched tight beneath his tailored beard. What makes you think I would ever sign this? I whispered back, maintaining my rigid smile for the flashing cameras. Because if you do not, I will take this microphone and tell this entire room that you are suffering from a severe psychological breakdown, Marcus hissed. He tightened his grip on my shoulder, making me wince in genuine pain. I will tell them you have been institutionalized. I will tell the mayor, the congregation, and every major investor in Atlanta that my eldest daughter has lost her mind and that we are stepping in to manage your affairs for your own safety. We will have you declared mentally unfit by Monday morning and completely seize the estate. Do you honestly think anyone in this wealthy, powerful room will believe a bitter, lonely accountant over a highly respected, beloved pillar of the community? You have exactly 30 seconds to sign away the trust right now, or your professional and personal life is officially over forever. The sheer unpredictable cruelty of his quiet threat hit me like a physical blow to the chest. He was willing to publicly destroy my sanity just to cover up his federal bank fraud. He would happily paint me as a hysterical, unhinged woman just to protect his crumbling, fraudulent empire. Connor slid closer, boxing me in on the other side of the brightly lit stage. He proudly adjusted his velvet cuffs and leaned down so his mouth was hovering just inches from my ear. He smelled of expensive cologne and cheap, desperate greed. Listen to your father, Maya, Connor whispered, his breath hot against my cheek. You are completely out of your depth here. You are just a simple, glorified, quiet number cruncher. Managing a massive generational fortune requires elite vision strategy and powerful social relationships you simply do not possess. He let out a low, patronizing chuckle that made my skin crawl with revulsion. Let us be honest for a second. A black woman like you certainly does not have the natural business acumen or the right pedigree to sit at the big table. You simply do not belong anywhere in these exclusive elite circles. You are making everyone uncomfortable just by being here tonight. Be a good girl, sign the legal document, and go back to your little cubicle in Chicago where you belong. Let the men handle the real wealth before you embarrass yourself further." Connor stepped back and patted my arm, adjusting his posture to look like a supportive brother-in-law for Chloe's continuous live stream. The sheer blind entitlement radiating from him was absolutely suffocating. They genuinely believed their own sick delusions. They truly thought my gender and my race made me inherently inferior, easily manipulated, and easily discarded. They had spent their entire lives treating me like the hired help, and they fully expected me to bow my head and hand over my grandmother's legacy just to avoid making them look bad in front of a wealthy crowd. I slowly looked down at the shiny gold-plated pen resting heavily in my sweating palm. The entire massive ballroom was waiting in hushed anticipation for me to complete the transaction. My mother, Beatrice, was beaming brightly from her seat at the head table, clutching her hands together in a flawless display of manufactured maternal joy. Chloe was holding her phone perfectly steady, capturing every agonizing second for her 500,000 loyal followers. The city mayor was watching with polite, quiet interest, holding his crystal champagne flute. The church elders were nodding their silent approval from the front row. They all truly thought they were witnessing a beautiful, heartwarming moment of family unity and generational wealth transfer. I finally looked at Marcus. I then looked at Connor. Their highly smug, expectant faces were a testament to decades of unchecked privilege and toxic manipulation. They had cornered me in a room full of their powerful friends, believing the immense pressure of the spotlight would break my spine and force my compliance. I slowly lifted the gold pen slightly. Marcus exhaled a sharp breath of relief, loosening his painful grip on my shoulder, thinking he had won. Connor smirked, leaning forward eagerly to witness his ultimate financial victory. But I did not uncap the pen. I did not move the legal document closer to me. Instead, I flipped the heavy metal pen upside down, gripping it fiercely like a dagger in my fist. I raised my arm high in the air and brought it down with every single ounce of strength I possessed. The blunt end of the gold pen slammed straight through the center of the transfer document, tearing through the thick cream paper and embedding itself a full inch deep into the solid mahogany table. The loud, violent crack echoed through the massive ballroom like a gunshot. The string quartet gasped and dropped their bows. My father jumped backward in absolute terrified shock. I ripped the microphone straight out of Marcus' trembling hand and turned to face the silent, horrified crowd. The feedback screech pierced the dead silence of the ballroom, making several people flinch and cover their ears. I stood tall at the head table, staring out at the sea of pale, shocked faces. Politicians who had just been clapping were now frozen with their glasses halfway to their mouths. Church elders leaned forward in their seats, squinting in confusion. Marcus was paralyzed, his hand hovering in the air where the microphone had been just seconds before. Connor was staring at the gold pen embedded in the wood, as if it were an alien artifact. I reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out my slim silver tablet. With a single tap of my finger, I connected to the country club's wireless projection system. I had tipped the audio-visual technician earlier to ensure my access code bypassed the main security firewall. The massive digital screens flanking the stage flickered. The elegant cursive Washington family crest vanished. In its place, stark black and white bank statements illuminated the room. I tapped the microphone twice, ensuring every syllable would carry. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "My father just told you all that we are celebrating generational wealth tonight. He claimed we are honoring the brilliant business acumen of my brother-in-law Connor." I pointed to the giant glowing screens behind me. "I believe in transparency, so I decided to share the actual financial figures behind this celebrated expansion." Murmurs erupted across the ballroom as the attendees squinted to read the projected documents. The front row of investors immediately recognized the formatting of the bank wire transfers. "What you are looking at is the complete financial history of Connor's venture capital firm," I announced, pacing slowly across the stage. "As you can clearly see, it is not a firm at all. It is a registered shell company in Delaware with 0 employees, 0 offices, and 0 legitimate business transactions." Connor lunged forward, his face flushed a dark, violent red. "Turn that off!" he roared, swiping at my tablet. I sidestepped him easily, letting him stumble against the heavy mahogany table. Security, I loudly instructed into the microphone. If that man touches me again, I will press assault charges right here in front of the mayor. Two large security guards at the edge of the stage immediately stepped forward, crossing their arms. Connor froze, his chest heaving as he realized he was trapped. I turned my attention back to the captivated audience. For the past 18 months, Connor has been systematically draining the Washington family trust. I continued, swiping to the next slide. The screen updated to show a dizzying list of international wire transfers. He has siphoned exactly $4 million. None of that money went toward real estate or tech expansions or community development. Every single cent was wired directly to offshore accounts in Macau to cover his catastrophic illegal gambling debts. The ballroom exploded into chaos. The mayor stood up so quickly his chair crashed backward onto the floor. Whispers turned into loud, frantic shouts. Investors scrambled for their phones, frantically pulling up their own portfolios to see if they were exposed. Beatrice let out a high-pitched wail, clutching her chest as she sank back into her seat. Marcus was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white, his face drained of all color. He looked like a man watching his entire life burn to the ground in real time. He tried to speak, to issue a denial, or command the crowd to sit down, but no sound came out. His absolute silence was the ultimate admission of guilt. They had known. My parents had known Connor was bleeding them dry, and they were willing to sacrifice my sanity and my legal autonomy just to quietly cover his tracks and save their precious societal image. They had chosen their pride over their own daughter. "You wanted me to sign away my authority as the sole trustee," I said, looking down at my father. "You threatened to have me institutionalized if I did not help you hide his federal crimes. But I am the one who audits the trust, Marcus. I have been compiling this evidence for 6 months. Copies of these exact documents were delivered to the FBI field office in Atlanta 3 hours ago." The gasps from the church elders were audible over the sound system. "You are all witnessing a crime scene," I told the room. "I highly suggest anyone who has given Connor money for his imaginary expansion contact their legal counsel immediately." A sharp, frantic scream ripped through the air to my left. Chloe had finally snapped out of her vanity-induced trance. Her perfectly curated world of luxury sponsorships and high society privilege was disintegrating in front of a live audience. She charged across the stage, her sequined gown catching the light like broken glass. "You ruined everything," she shrieked, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated fury. "You ugly, bitter liar." She threw herself at me, swinging her arms wildly in a desperate bid to snatch the microphone from my hand. I stepped backward, avoiding her manic, grasping fingers. In her blind rage, Chloe tripped over the thick black cable running along the edge of the stage. She flailed her arms, trying to catch her balance, but slammed hard into her own broadcasting setup. The heavy ring light teetered and crashed to the floor. Her smartphone clattered across the polished hardwood, spinning wildly before coming to a stop, propped up against a floral arrangement. The camera lens was perfectly angled upward, capturing Chloe's mascara-stained face as she scrambled on her hands and knees, screaming obscenities. The live stream was still active. The comments section on her phone screen was scrolling by so fast, it was nothing but a complete blur of utter shock and absolute outrage. 500,000 loyal followers were watching the pristine Washington family princess completely unravel in real time. Chloe scrambled to her feet, clutching the ruined hem of her sequined gown. Her perfectly contoured face was streaked with thick, black mascara, tears making her look like a deranged raccoon in the harsh glare of the fallen ring light. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me, her voice reaching a shrill pitch that made the microphone feedback whine in protest. "You are just a bitter, jealous sister," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high, vaulted ceilings of the country club. "You have always been incredibly jealous of me, Maya. You sit alone in your miserable, dark apartment, hating your pathetic life, so you decided to ruin the best night of mine." She turned wildly toward the stunned crowd, and then toward her phone, which was still actively broadcasting every humiliating second to her loyal audience. "Do not believe a single word this psychotic woman says. She is just a sad, lonely spinster trying to steal my spotlight because no man has ever loved her enough to give her a ring. The sheer audacity of her delusion was impressive to witness. She was standing in the wreckage of her fiancé, exposed financial fraud, and her only instinct was to attack my relationship status. It was the exact tired, pathetic script my parents had fed her since childhood. I did not raise my voice or take the bait. I simply looked down at my sleek silver tablet and swiped my index finger to the left. The massive digital screens flanking the stage flickered again, replacing Connor's offshore wire transfers with a new set of highly detailed financial documents. These were not corporate ledger entries. These were personal platinum credit card statements issued directly from the Washington Family Trust. Since we are openly discussing who pays for what tonight, I think your dedicated followers deserve the honest truth about your flawless luxury lifestyle, I said, my voice projecting clearly over the murmuring, gasping crowd. I tapped the screen, highlighting a series of massive, exorbitant purchases. The display magnified a $60,000 charge at a high-end automotive dealership located in Buckhead. Below that was a $50,000 charge at the Cartier boutique. And right here is a monthly revolving balance of roughly $20,000 spent entirely at designer fashion boutiques in Paris and Milan. Chloe froze completely, her mouth opening and closing silently, as her personalized banking details were broadcast to the entire elite congregation. You love bragging endlessly about being a brilliant self-made influencer. I continued stepping closer to the edge of the stage. You love selling expensive courses to young, impressionable women, claiming that hard work and manifesting brought you a luxury car fleet and an endless supply of authentic designer handbags. I zoomed in on a very specific recent transaction. The bright red circle highlighted a massive withdrawal from the primary trust account that I single-handedly managed. Let us talk about that beautiful 5-carat diamond engagement ring you are currently flashing for all the cameras, I said, locking my eyes directly with my sister. Connor did not buy that expensive ring with the profits from his imaginary venture capital firm. He used your supplementary trust credit card to purchase it secretly. You literally bought your own engagement ring, using the money I generated through careful investments and grueling 60-hour work weeks. The entire ballroom erupted into loud, audible gasps. Several wealthy socialites covered their mouths in genuine shock. Chloe instinctively grabbed her left hand immediately, hiding the massive diamond behind her back, as if the heavy stone had suddenly caught fire. Connor stood completely frozen against the mahogany table, his face pale and slick with cold, nervous sweat. He could not even muster a pathetic denial because the bank routing numbers were displayed in crystal-clear high definition right above his head. "You are not a self-made success, Chloe," I stated firmly, ensuring the active live stream captured every single syllable. "You are a financial parasite, living entirely off the dividends of my silent, unpaid labor. Every single luxury item you own was paid for by the bitter, jealous sister you just mocked." The heavy silence in the room was broken only by my finger tapping the screen one final time. I pulled up the primary banking portal for the Washington Family Trust. With a single deliberate keystroke, I highlighted all 3 of Chloe's platinum credit lines. Account canceled, the automated system confirmed, flashing a bright green checkmark across the main screens. Chloe let out a loud, horrified gasp, reaching toward the displays, as if she could somehow stop the transaction from processing. "You cannot do that to me," she sobbed, her pristine influencer facade completely shattered. "How am I supposed to pay for anything tonight?" "I am afraid that is no longer my problem," I replied smoothly. "But I did arrange for a safe ride home for you since you no longer own a vehicle." I switched the main display one last time, tapping into the live video feed I had discreetly requested from the valet security camera. The high-definition footage showed the circular driveway outside the grand main entrance. A heavy-duty tow truck was currently backing up to a pristine white Mercedes G-Wagon. 2 men wearing reflective safety vests were quickly securing heavy metal chains to the expensive tires. "That is my car!" Chloe shrieked, pointing blindly at the glowing screen. "That is my car! Actually, it is my car, I corrected her, watching the tow truck lift the front wheels off the pavement. I leased it under my corporate entity, and since you are no longer an authorized user, I sent the repossession agents to collect my property. The live stream captured the exact moment the tow truck pulled away, hauling her ultimate status symbol down the long manicured driveway. The scrolling chat on her fallen phone exploded with thousands of ruthless, mocking comments as the pristine Washington family image was finally destroyed. The heavy thud of the shattered ring light echoed loudly through the entire ballroom, but nobody moved to help my sister. Chloe remained sprawled on the polished hardwood floor, sobbing hysterically into her hands, while her smartphone continued broadcasting her absolute humiliation to the world. A few tables away, the city mayor slowly lowered his crystal champagne flute and signaled to his private security detail to clear a fast path toward the exit. The prominent church elders were whispering furiously among themselves, casting highly disgusted glances at the head table. My mother Beatrice finally snapped out of her paralyzed state. She leaped from her gilded chair and lunged toward the closest group of wealthy socialites, desperately grabbing the arm of a powerful state senator's wife. "Please do not listen to this nonsense," Beatrice pleaded, her voice shrill and trembling with sheer panic. "Maya is just unwell, and she is completely making all of this up to hurt us." The senator's wife firmly peeled my mother's manicured fingers off her silk sleeve and took a deliberate step backward. The utter revulsion burning inside the woman's eyes was unmistakable. Beatrice let out a strangled gasp, realizing her carefully constructed high society reputation was evaporating into thin air right in front of her. Marcus could no longer maintain his facade of the benevolent, wealthy patriarch. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched white collar as he watched his most valuable connections walking toward the ballroom doors. He turned his blazing fury toward me, stomping across the stage until he was standing just inches from my face. "You ungrateful, vicious little snake!" he bellowed, his voice carrying through the sound system without needing a microphone. "You think you are so smart projecting these fake banking documents to ruin your brother-in-law. Connor is twice the business mind you will ever be." I held my ground, refusing to shrink away from his towering frame. "He stole $4 million from the family trust, Marcus," I replied, my tone dangerously quiet. "He blew our generational wealth on baccarat tables in Macau, and you helped him cover it up." Marcus slammed his fist onto the mahogany table, sending silverware clattering to the floor. "He did what he had to do to secure our investments," he roared, spittle flying from his lips. "Connor is expanding the Washington name and taking risks that a cowardly pencil pusher like you could never comprehend." Connor stood frozen behind him, looking completely terrified as Marcus continued his tirade. "He took the money because I permitted him to take the money," Marcus yelled, gesturing wildly toward the massive digital screens displaying the fraudulent transfers. "He is the man who is actually elevating this family, while you sit in a cold Chicago apartment doing nothing but judging us. You refused to release the trust capital, so we found a way around your pathetic little roadblocks." I stared at him, letting his words ring out over the deafening silence of the ballroom. "You found a way around me," I repeated slowly, ensuring the lapel microphone picked up my voice perfectly. "Are you publicly admitting that you knew about the forged signature on the trust transfer documents?" Marcus let out a harsh, arrogant bark of laughter, completely blind to the legal trap he was leaping into. "I authorized that signature," he shouted, thumping his chest proudly. "I built this family from the ground up, Maya. Every dime in those accounts exists because of my hard work and my connections. Connor had every right to sign your name because I gave him the right. I dictate where money goes, not you." The collective gasp from the remaining guests was loud enough to rival the string quartet. A federal investigator could not have scripted a more perfect confession. Marcus had just admitted to conspiracy and federal bank fraud on a live microphone in front of 200 witnesses and 500,000 online viewers. Beatrice shrieked her husband's name, clapping her hands over her mouth, but it was far too late. Connor grabbed his hair, looking frantically at the exit doors, clearly calculating if he could outrun the security guards. "I own you," Marcus snarled, pointing a trembling finger directly at my chest. I gave you life and I gave you a career. You will shut down this ridiculous presentation right now. You will apologize to Connor and you will sign the rest of the capital over to him before we leave this room tonight. If you refuse me, I will destroy you so completely that you will never work in the financial sector again. I smiled a genuine cold smile that made my father falter. You cannot destroy me, Marcus, I said softly, tapping my tablet screen one more time. You already destroyed yourself. The main projectors flashed, pulling up highly sensitive legal records. The screen displayed the primary deed to the sprawling Washington family estate in Atlanta, alongside a massive defaulted loan agreement. You authorized Connor to forge my signature to secure a collateralized loan against the family mansion, I announced, pointing to the glaring red default notices. But Connor lost that money too, and the bank quietly foreclosed on your pristine luxury home last month. Marcus staggered backward, his arrogant expression melting into absolute sheer terror. He looked wildly at the documents, realizing his ultimate secret was now public knowledge. You have been living in a foreclosed house hosting galas to pretend you are still millionaires, I stated, my voice ringing with total finality. When the bank listed the fraudulent debt for pennies on the dollar to clear their books, my private forensic accounting firm purchased it through a proxy holding company. I tapped the final glowing green confirmation button on my silver tablet. You do not have the power to destroy me or kick me out of this family anymore, Marcus, because as of this morning, I officially own your house, and you have exactly 3 days to vacate my property. Beatrice let out a sound that was half sob and half scream, her hands flying to her perfectly coiffed hair as the reality of her impending eviction settled over the room. The absolute horror of losing her pristine Atlanta mansion, the very foundation of her social supremacy, finally broke her. But instead of surrendering, my mother reached into her designer handbag with frantic, trembling fingers. She bypassed her makeup and her credit cards, pulling out a thick, sealed manila envelope. She shoved her way past a paralyzed Marcus and planted herself at the absolute edge of the stage, waving the envelope wildly at the remaining politicians and the cluster of church elders who had not yet fled the ballroom. "Do not listen to a single word this poor girl is saying," Beatrice cried out, her voice echoing with a manufactured desperate sorrow. "She is terribly, terribly sick." My mother ripped open the envelope and yanked out a stack of medical documents printed on heavy, official-looking letterhead. She brandished them like a shield against the damning financial records still glowing on the screens behind me. "Maya is suffering from a severe psychotic break," Beatrice announced to the silent room, tears welling in her eyes with Oscar-worthy precision. "We have been trying to manage this privately, but the stress of managing the family trust has completely shattered her mind." The ballroom fell into a stunned, uneasy silence. The church elders exchanged deeply concerned glances, their previous outrage shifting into uncomfortable pity. Beatrice pressed her advantage, waving the forged psychiatric evaluation at the crowd. "This is a certified medical assessment from a top psychiatric facility," my mother lied effortlessly. "It details her severe paranoia, her chronic delusions of persecution, and her obsessive-compulsive fabrications. She believes everyone is stealing from her because her mind is fundamentally broken. All of these bank statements and foreclosure notices are nothing but the manic digital hallucinations of a deeply unstable woman." I stood perfectly still, watching my own mother orchestrate the most vicious, calculated character assassination of my entire life. She was willing to legally declare her own daughter insane to strip away my autonomy and lock me in a psychiatric ward just to protect her stolen wealth and her country club memberships. She held the forged papers high, letting the crest of a fictional psychiatric institute catch the light of the ballroom chandeliers. Connor immediately seized the lifeline my mother had thrown him. The terror vanished from his sweating face, quickly replaced by a mask of deep, paternal concern. He stepped forward, placing a heavy, comforting hand on Beatrice's shaking shoulder. "We did not want our family tragedy to become public entertainment," Connor said, projecting his voice so the remaining socialites could hear his faux sympathy. "We have been begging Maya to check into a residential treatment center for months. She has been up at all hours creating fake documents, hacking into public records, and convincing herself that we are out to get her. It breaks my heart to see her deteriorate like this on stage. He turned to look at me, and under the guise of an apologetic, sorrowful brother-in-law, a vile, triumphant smirk spread across his face. He truly believed he had won. He believed that in the wealthy appearance-obsessed circles of Atlanta high society, a medical cover-up was much easier to swallow than a massive financial scandal. Mental illness was a tragic, whispered excuse that would allow everyone in the room to simply look away and pretend my concrete evidence was nothing but a crazy woman's fever dream. The turning point in the room was palpable. I could see the narrative shifting in real time. The mayor's security detail relaxed their defensive postures. The wealthy investors who had been panicking over their portfolios suddenly looked relieved, eager to believe that their money was safe, and the entire presentation was just a tragic, elaborate hoax. Whispers rippled through the crowd, full of hushed sympathy and clicking tongues. They were choosing to believe the lie because the lie was comfortable. They were choosing to believe the golden family over the scapegoat daughter. Marcus straightened his posture, sensing the crowd returning to his side. He adjusted his silk tie and adopted a tone of weary, tragic authority. "Security, please escort my daughter to my private car," Marcus instructed, pointing at the guards. "For her own safety, we are taking her directly to a medical facility tonight. She is clearly a danger to herself and to the reputation of this community." The two large security guards hesitated, glancing between my father's commanding presence and my perfectly calm demeanor. They took a slow, tentative step toward the stage. Connor's smirk widened into a full, teeth-baring grin. He crossed his arms over his chest, his eyes silently mocking me. He had stolen millions, lost their mansion, and yet he thought he was about to walk out of this country club as the tragic, supportive hero while I was dragged away in an ambulance. I did not back away from the approaching guards. I did not raise my voice in a desperate plea for them to believe me. I simply looked down at my wrist, calmly checking the polished face of my Cartier watch. I let the silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds, letting my father, my mother, and my brother-in-law bask in their temporary, fabricated victory. "I am not crazy, Mom," I said, my voice carrying a lethal, icy precision that stopped the security guards dead in their tracks. "I am completely lucid, entirely sane, and fully aware of every single transaction that has occurred in this family for the past 5 years." I slowly lowered my wrist and locked my gaze directly on Connor, watching his arrogant smirk begin to falter. But as a licensed financial fiduciary managing a multi-million-dollar trust, I am legally obligated to report federal wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny the absolute second I uncover it, I announced to the silent, breathless room. Before anyone could process my words, a piercing, deafening wail shattered the quiet elegance of the country club. The high-pitched, aggressive shriek of heavy police sirens erupted from the main road outside, growing exponentially louder by the second. Red and blue emergency lights violently flashed against the massive floor-to-ceiling ballroom windows, cutting through the darkness and painting my family's horrified faces in strobing neon colors. The heavy oak double doors of the grand ballroom were thrust apart with a violent kinetic force that sent a massive shockwave through the room. A dozen heavily armed officers flooded the elegant entryway, followed closely by severe men and women wearing dark tactical windbreakers bearing the bold yellow letters of the FBI. The jarring juxtaposition of Kevlar vests and holstered weapons against the backdrop of crystal chandeliers and silk-draped tables instantly paralyzed the remaining guests. The string quartet had long since stopped playing, leaving only the heavy thud of combat boots stomping across the polished hardwood floor. The officers spread out with absolute precision, forming a secure perimeter that blocked all available exit routes from the country club. Beatrice let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Instead of shrinking away from the tactical team, her tear-stained face suddenly illuminated with a massive, twisted smile of pure relief. Her delusion was so deeply ingrained, she genuinely believed the universe had just arrived to validate her desperate lies. She assumed my father had utilized his vast political connections to summon the authorities to handle my alleged mental breakdown. She practically shoved a frozen waiter aside as she sprinted toward the approaching agents. "Thank God you are finally here," Beatrice shrieked, waving the forged psychiatric documents in the air like a flag of victory. "You need to take my daughter away immediately, before she does any more damage." She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my chest. "Arrest her right now," she demanded, her voice echoing with vicious, aristocratic entitlement. "She is a deranged thief who just confessed to stealing our family property and terrorizing this charity gala. She is completely out of her mind and belongs in a secure psychiatric ward." The high society crowd held their collective breath, eagerly anticipating my immediate downfall. The mayor wiped cold sweat from his brow, clearly hoping this swift arrest would save him from any lingering political fallout. Whispers of agreement rippled through the wealthy attendees, who desperately wanted to believe the comfortable lie of my insanity over the harsh reality of their compromised investments. The lead FBI agent, a tall, imposing man with steel gray hair and a face carved from granite, did not even break his stride. He did not acknowledge the frantic, wealthy woman screaming in his path. He simply sidestepped Beatrice as if she were a minor architectural inconvenience. Two local police officers immediately flanked my mother gently but firmly, pushing her back into the crowd to clear the primary walkway. Beatrice sputtered in shocked indignation, offended that her commands were being blatantly ignored by civil servants. The lead agent marched straight toward the main stage, his eyes fixed intently forward. I stood perfectly still with my hands folded, resting calmly over my leather portfolio. I did not flinch or back away as he climbed the short flight of carpeted steps. He stepped onto the elevated platform and walked right past me without a single glance in my direction. Connor let out a pathetic, whimpering sound. The fake venture capitalist took one desperate look at the sheer drop off the back of the stage and visibly calculated his chances of running. Before his expensive leather loafers could even pivot, a federal agent grabbed him by the shoulder and spun him around. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around Connor's wrists echoed sharply through the microphone I had left resting on the podium. He dropped to his knees, sobbing instantly and begging for his lawyer, while staining the stage with tears of pure cowardice. Marcus puffed out his chest, attempting to physically block the lead agent from advancing any further. "You are making a monumental mistake," Officer Marcus bellowed, his face purple with indignant rage. "I am Marcus Washington. I personally fund the police pension program in this district. You have absolutely no jurisdiction here, and I demand that you unhand my son-in-law this instant." He jabbed a thick finger against the agent's tactical vest. "I will have your badge for this profound disrespect. I will call the governor right now and see to it that your entire career is dismantled by morning." The lead agent did not blink. He grabbed my father's extended wrist, twisting his arm firmly behind his back with practiced, effortless authority. Marcus let out a shocked, undignified yelp as his chest collided hard against the polished mahogany head table. A second pair of steel handcuffs snapped tightly over my father's custom-tailored cuffs. "You are making a massive mistake," Marcus roared, struggling helplessly against the tight metal restraints. "I built this city. I built this family. You cannot touch me." Beatrice let out a blood-curdling scream, dropping her forged medical documents as she watched the untouchable patriarch of the Washington family being subdued like a common street criminal. The remaining elite guests pressed themselves against the silk-lined walls, their eyes wide with absolute horror. The mighty pillars of their exclusive social circle were currently handcuffed and bleeding their precious dignity all over the stage. The lead agent turned fully to face the captivated, terrified ballroom. He adjusted his stance and spoke with a booming, authoritative voice that required no microphone to dominate the space. "Marcus Washington and Connor Hayes, you are both under arrest," he announced, his words dropping like heavy stones into the silent room. "You are officially charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, check forgery, and the criminal embezzlement of over $4 million. A massive unified gasp of pure horror erupted from the high society crowd. Women clutched their pearls and men frantically reached for their cell phones. The illusion was completely shattered. The ultimate untouchable dynasty of Atlanta had just been exposed as nothing more than a desperate criminal enterprise, and everyone in the room finally realized the bitter, jealous sister had been telling the absolute truth. Connor scoffed a desperate, breathless sound that failed to project the arrogant confidence he was desperately aiming for. He shook his head, flashing a slick, manufactured smile at the lead FBI agent, as if they were old fraternity brothers sharing an inside joke. "You have made a colossal mistake here, buddy," Connor said, his voice dripping with condescension as he rattled his steel handcuffs. "Do you have any idea who my family is? My father is a senior partner at one of the largest corporate law firms on the East Coast. He plays golf with federal judges and dines with senators. If you do not take these cuffs off me right now, I am going to have him on the phone and your badge will be sitting on his mahogany desk by tomorrow morning." He puffed out his chest, attempting to physically intimidate the federal officer with the sheer weight of his privileged bloodline. "You are dealing with the Hayes family." He spat, his eyes wide and frantic. "We do not go to prison for accounting errors." The lead agent did not even blink. He reached into the inner pocket of his tactical windbreaker and extracted a neatly folded federal warrant. He held it up so Connor could see the bold black signatures stamped across the bottom of the page. "You can absolutely call your father the agent," said his voice, a low, gravelly rumble that commanded absolute authority. "In fact, I highly recommend it. He will be thrilled to know we finally apprehended you." Connor blinked, his arrogant smile faltering slightly as the agent stepped closer. "Your wealthy parents did not send their elite legal team to protect you tonight, Connor. They are the ones who supplied our field office with your offshore bank routing numbers." The agent leaned in, his gaze boring into Connor's rapidly paling face. "You made a very sloppy mistake when you decided to siphon $2 million out of your own mother's retirement portfolio to cover your initial losses in Macau. They cooperated fully with our investigation to ensure they would not be implicated in your massive international money laundering operation. Your own father handed us the final nail for your coffin." The remaining color drained entirely from Connor's face, leaving his skin a sickly translucent white. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. His bulletproof safety net of generational wealth and powerful parental connections had completely vanished. He was entirely alone, facing decades in a federal penitentiary with absolutely no one coming to his rescue. His eyes darted wildly around the ballroom, searching for any possible exit, any remaining ally, but the elite crowd only stared back at him with undisguised disgust. The very socialites he had spent months schmoozing were now whispering furiously, actively stepping away from the stage as if his criminality were a contagious disease. Panic, raw and unfiltered, seized his entire body. Connor whipped his head around to look at Marcus, who was currently pinned against the head table by a second federal agent. The desperate survival instinct of a cornered coward completely took over. "Wait!" Connor screamed, his voice cracking violently as he thrashed against the grip of the officer holding him. "You cannot put all of this on me. I did not act alone." He jutted his chin toward his father-in-law, his eyes wide with frantic, treacherous terror. "He made me do it!" Connor shrieked, his voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Marcus orchestrated the entire thing. He knew the venture capital firm was a fake within the first 3 months. When he found out I lost his initial investment capital, he threatened to destroy my life if I did not help him recoup the losses. Marcus let out a guttural, enraged roar, struggling furiously against his metal restraints. "Shut your lying mouth, you pathetic parasite!" Marcus bellowed, his face twisting into a mask of pure demonic fury. "Do not listen to a single word this degenerate gambler says." But Connor was entirely unhinged, screaming over his father-in-law's protests, desperate to trade Marcus for a lighter prison sentence. "He is the one who brought me the blank trust transfer documents," Connor yelled, addressing the FBI agents, but ensuring the entire ballroom heard every damning detail. "Marcus handed me the paperwork and explicitly ordered me to forge Maya's signature. He said it was the only way to release the capital we needed to stop the bank from foreclosing on his precious mansion. He told me exactly how to bypass the internal security protocols. I was just following his instructions. He is the mastermind. He forced me to be his scapegoat." The sheer audacity of the betrayal snapped the final fraying thread of Marcus Washington's sanity. The pristine, untouchable patriarch of Atlanta high society completely lost his mind. With a sudden, explosive burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, Marcus violently wrenched his body sideways, tearing himself out of the surprised federal agent's grip. He let out a deafening animalistic battle cry and launched his entire body weight directly at Connor. Because his hands were securely cuffed behind his back, Marcus used his head like a battering ram, slamming his forehead viciously into the center of Connor's face. A loud, sickening crunch echoed through the silent ballroom as Connor's nose shattered on impact. Blood exploded down the front of Connor's crisp white tuxedo shirt. He let out a high-pitched squeal of agony, stumbling backward and tripping over the heavy microphone cord still snaking across the wooden stage. Marcus did not stop. He threw himself forward again, tackling his bleeding son-in-law to the floor. The two men crashed hard onto the polished stage, thrashing and kicking wildly, like feral animals. Marcus drove his knees repeatedly into Connor's ribs, roaring obscenities, while Connor flailed blindly, trying to kick his father-in-law away. Beatrice let out a piercing shriek, dropping to her knees. The glamorous illusion of the Washington dynasty was dead. The heavy silk of my designer gown jerked sharply as Beatrice lunged forward, her manicured hands clutching the fabric with a desperate, animalistic grip. She was completely oblivious to the chaotic brawl happening just feet away, where federal agents were actively pulling a bloodied Connor off the polished hardwood floor. Her perfectly pinned updo had unraveled, sending damp strands of blonde hair clinging to her tear-streaked foundation-stained cheeks. "Please, Maya, you have to stop them!" Beatrice wailed, her voice cracking as she stared up at me from the ground. "Tell these officers it is a misunderstanding. Tell them you made a mistake with the accounting software. You cannot let them take your father out of this ballroom in handcuffs. Think about the church elders. Think about the country club admissions board. We will be completely ruined." She tugged frantically at my dress, nearly pulling herself up by the expensive fabric. The sheer absurdity of her priorities hung in the air like toxic smoke. Her husband and son-in-law were currently being read their Miranda rights for stealing millions of dollars and committing federal fraud, yet her only genuine concern was her standing in the wealthy Atlanta social scene. "Evelyn Vance and the other ladies from the charity committee are right over there watching us," Beatrice sobbed, gesturing wildly toward the shrinking group of socialites huddled near the exit doors. "They will strip us of our memberships by morning. We will never be invited to another gala. You are destroying our entire legacy over a simple family disagreement. I can fix this, Maya. I will make Marcus pay the trust back. Just call off the dogs and let us handle our private affairs behind closed doors like civilized people." I stared down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel fundamentally inadequate. This was the same mother who had mocked my career, belittled my independence, and stood silently by while her husband actively plotted to bankrupt my future. She had literally just attempted to declare me legally insane in front of hundreds of people to protect her stolen wealth. Now, stripped of her arrogance and her financial safety net, she was nothing but a hollow shell of vanity, begging the daughter she despised for a lifeline she absolutely did not deserve. The federal agents successfully separated Marcus and Connor, hauling both men to their feet. My father was breathing heavily, his custom tuxedo ripped at the shoulder, a fresh bruise forming rapidly along his jawline. Connor was a sobbing, pathetic mess, blood pouring freely from his shattered nose and dripping onto his expensive Italian loafers. As the officers began marching them forcefully toward the grand double doors of the ballroom, Beatrice let out another agonizing shriek. She pulled harder on my dress, her knuckles turning white. "Maya, I am your mother," she pleaded, her voice echoing with a manufactured, desperate maternal authority that she had never once earned. "You owe me your loyalty. You owe this family your protection. If you let them drag my husband out of here like a common criminal, you will be dead to me. You will be completely cut off. You will never be welcome in our home or our lives ever again. Do you hear me? I will erase you from this family." The threat was so instinctively cruel, so perfectly aligned with decades of her conditional love, that it finally severed the last remaining thread of sympathy I held for her. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached down and wrapped my fingers around her wrists, applying just enough pressure to peel her desperate clawing hands off my silk gown. I let her arms drop uselessly to her sides. "You cannot cut me off from a family that never truly wanted me," I said, my voice eerily calm and carrying flawlessly over the murmurs of the stunned crowd. "You cannot banish me from a home that you do not even own anymore." I looked directly into her terrified wide eyes, ensuring she heard every single syllable of my next sentence. "And as for erasing me, I think you already provided the perfect script for that particular occasion." Beatrice froze, confusion momentarily replacing the panic on her face. I took a slow, deliberate breath, channeling the exact, cold, dismissive tone she had used on me so many times before. I looked down at her kneeling form and recited the words that had been permanently burned into my memory. "This family needs space," I stated, repeating the vicious birthday text message she had sent me verbatim. "Your negative energy drags us down. We are better off without you." The words hit her like a physical strike. Her mouth opened and closed in a silent gasp as the recognition dawned in her eyes. She remembered writing those exact words. She remembered sending them to me on a day I was supposed to be celebrating, deliberately trying to isolate and break me. Now those same words were serving as her absolute, irreversible condemnation. She opened her mouth to argue, to formulate another manipulative excuse, but I did not give her the chance. I stepped cleanly over her trembling, kneeling body. I did not look back as she slumped entirely against the floor, weeping into her hands, as the federal agents officially escorted Marcus and Connor out of the country club and into the flashing neon lights of the waiting police cruisers. The high society crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, their faces pale masks of pure, unadulterated shock. They had just witnessed the complete surgical dismantling of the Washington Empire, and none of them dared to speak a single word as I walked purposefully down the center aisle of the ballroom. As I neared the exit, I glanced toward the far corner of the room. Chloe was still collapsed against the base of a decorative marble pillar, completely immobilized by her own hysterical tears. But her trembling hands were still firmly gripping her smartphone, the camera lens pointed directly at the stage. The red recording light was glowing steadily in the dim room. She had not stopped the broadcast. Every desperate plea, every violent punch, every federal charge, and every single second of their total social annihilation had just been live-streamed in crystal-clear, high-definition video to millions of captivated viewers across the globe. The Washington family reputation was not just dead in Atlanta. It was permanently digitally eradicated from the face of the earth. The screen of Chloe's phone lit up like a slot machine paying out a jackpot, but the incoming digital notifications were a relentless, unstoppable cascade of absolute financial and social ruin. The livestream chat on her profile was moving entirely too fast to read, an aggressive blur of outraged comments, mocking emojis, and thousands of viewers ruthlessly dragging the previously pristine Washington name through the digital mud. Then came the devastating wave of corporate emails. A bright red banner flashed across the top of her screen from her primary influencer management agency, officially suspending her lucrative contract pending the outcome of a federal criminal investigation. Another sharp notification chimed loudly from a luxury cosmetics brand. She had just signed a massive six-figure promotional deal with formally terminating their partnership and citing an immediate violation of their strict morality clause. Chloe stared blindly at the glowing rectangle in her hands as her entire manufactured reality disintegrated bite by bite. The elite fitness apparel companies, the boutique travel agencies, and the high-end jewelry designers were all actively fleeing the toxic radioactive fallout of her family's highly publicized federal fraud scandal in real time. She scrambled desperately to her feet, her expensive designer heels slipping clumsily on the polished hardwood floor as she frantically swiped at the relentless wave of corporate cancellation emails. The arrogant, untouchable socialite who had mocked my cheap clothes and standard career just hours earlier was entirely gone. In her place stood a terrified, hyperventilating woman whose only source of income and validation had vanished into thin air. She dropped the broadcasting phone, letting it clatter harshly against the base of the marble pillar, and lunged directly toward me. Her hands grabbed frantically at my forearm, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into my skin as she abandoned every last ounce of her pride. Maya, you have to help me right now. Chloe sobbed, her voice a shrill, breathless panic that echoed through the nearly empty ballroom. My bank accounts are going to be completely frozen by morning. The federal agents will absolutely seize my personal assets because Connor legally handled my entire investment portfolio. I have absolutely nothing left to my name. You are practically a billionaire now, and you control the real trust capital. Just give me a small monthly allowance, just enough to keep my luxury apartment and pay for my basic expenses until I can rebrand myself and fix this nightmare. We are sisters, Maya. You cannot just leave your own flesh and blood with nothing. I looked down at her trembling hands clutching my arm, feeling absolutely no urge to comfort the sibling who had actively participated in my lifelong degradation. I firmly peeled her desperate fingers away from my skin and took a deliberate step backward, creating a cold, impenetrable boundary between us. You spent your entire life aggressively mocking my work ethic and telling everyone in our social circle that I was a tragic, boring pencil pusher who simply did not understand the relentless hustle of a modern entrepreneur. I replied, my voice perfectly steady and utterly devoid of any familial warmth. You proudly lived off stolen money and paraded your fraudulent luxury in my face while treating me like dirt on your shoe. I am absolutely not funding your lavish lifestyle or subsidizing your next desperate internet rebrand. However, because I actually do believe in the fundamental value of hard work, I am willing to give you the one specific thing you truly need right now. I unclasped the gold latch of my leather purse and reached inside my fingers, brushing past my encrypted tablet and locating a neatly folded piece of standard printer paper. Chloe's tear-filled eyes widened with a desperate, pathetic spark of sudden hope. She eagerly extended both hands, clearly expecting a high-value cashier's check or a signed authorization form granting her immediate access to a secondary emergency trust account. I placed the folded paper directly into her open palms and watched as she hurriedly ripped it open. The greedy anticipation on her face curdled instantly into pure, unadulterated shock. It was not a check. It was a standard entry-level job application for a local late-night fast food chain. The brightly colored corporate burger logo mocked her cheerfully from the top of the page, followed by blank fields requesting her previous retail work experience, available weekend shift hours, and minimum wage expectations. Chloe stared at the cheap paper as if it were coated in toxic acid, her mouth opening and closing repeatedly without producing a single sound. "This is your new reality, Chloe," I stated, ensuring every single word landed with devastating surgical precision. "You have absolutely no marketable skills, no completed college degree, and a public reputation that is currently burning to the ground on national television. Your glamorous influencer career is permanently over. You are going to have to learn how to earn an honest living, clock in for a physically demanding shift, and pay your own rent, just like the rest of the working class you always looked down upon. I highly suggest you fill that application out completely and return it to the shift manager before they fill the open positions." The sheer, overwhelming insult of the gesture rendered her completely mute. She let the fast food application flutter from her trembling fingers to the ballroom floor, sinking back down against the marble pillar in a state of absolute catatonic defeat. I turned my attention away from my shattered sister and looked down at my mother. Beatrice was still on her knees, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, heaving sobs. The grand ballroom had completely emptied out, leaving only the catering staff peering nervously from the kitchen doors, and a few lingering country club managers assessing the catastrophic damage to their establishment's prestigious reputation. I crouched down slightly, so I was at eye level with the woman who had actively permitted my emotional abuse for decades. I reached back into my purse one final time and pulled out a heavy legal document bound in a thick blue backing. I tapped the stiff official paperwork against my mother's shaking shoulder, forcing her to look up at me. Her eyes were bloodshot, her expensive mascara running in dark, jagged streaks down her pale cheeks. You mentioned earlier that you were terrified of what the church elders and the country club admissions board would think of our family tragedy. I said, my tone eerily conversational and thoroughly detached. I think you need to start worrying about where you are going to sleep this weekend instead. I pressed the heavy legal packet directly against her chest. Beatrice instinctively grabbed it, her eyes scanning the bold black text printed on the front page. It was a formally executed, court-approved 72-hour eviction notice for the sprawling Washington family mansion in Atlanta. The embossed legal seal from the county sheriff's office, stamped at the bottom, made it completely undeniable. As the sole owner of the proxy holding company that successfully purchased your defaulted collateral debt, I am officially executing my legal right to reclaim my property, I announced, standing up tall and looking down at the absolute ruins of my family. You have exactly 3 days to pack whatever clothes the federal government does not seize as evidence and vacate my house forever. Beatrice stared at the heavy legal document in her trembling hands, as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. Her mouth opened, but only a dry, pathetic rasp emerged. The pristine, untouchable matriarch of Atlanta high society was utterly paralyzed by the crushing weight of her own manufactured ruin. I turned on my heel, my silk gown swishing softly against the polished hardwood floor, and began my final walk toward the grand double doors of the ballroom. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. It was not the polite, hushed quiet of a sophisticated gathering, but the terrified, breathless stillness of a crowd that had just witnessed a brutal execution. Hundreds of elite guests, the very people my parents had spent decades schmoozing, bribing, and manipulating, actively shrank back as I approached. The wealthy socialites and powerful executives did not whisper a single word of comfort to my kneeling mother. They did not rush forward to offer legal assistance or financial support to my shattered sister. Instead, they moved deliberately out of my way, parting like a retreating tide, to clear a wide, unobstructed path for me to the exit. I could see the profound shift in their eyes. The thinly veiled contempt they had always harbored for the unremarkable, boring Washington daughter was entirely gone. It was replaced by a sharp, undeniable respect mingled with a healthy dose of genuine fear. They understood perfectly well that the empire they had revered was built on lies, and I was the architect who had just meticulously demolished it. I pushed through the heavy brass handles of the country club doors and stepped out into the crisp, cool evening air. The transition from the suffocating, perfumed atmosphere of the ballroom to the quiet reality of the night was instantly revitalizing. The valet rushed forward, practically tripping over his own feet, and brought my sleek black sedan to the curb with unprecedented speed. He held the door open, his eyes, carefully, averted entirely, unsure of how to interact with the woman who had just orchestrated the most spectacular downfall in the history of the club. I slipped into the leather driver's seat, the quiet hum of the engine offering a soothing contrast to the frantic screaming that had dominated the last hour of my life. Before pulling away from the illuminated portico, I paused, resting my hands on the steering wheel. Just 50 yards down the manicured driveway, a pair of federal police cruisers sat idling. Their red and blue emergency lights sliced silently through the darkness, casting long, erratic shadows across the pristine hedges. I watched with detached fascination as an agent firmly pressed a handcuffed Marcus into the back seat of the first vehicle. Connor was already slumped in the second car, his bloody face pressed miserably against the reinforced window. The doors slammed shut in rapid succession, a harsh metallic sound that echoed clearly across the empty parking lot. The cruisers accelerated down the winding driveway, their taillights merging with the distant glow of the city traffic. I sat alone in my car, waiting for the inevitable wave of guilt or sorrow that society dictates a daughter should feel when watching her family destroyed. I searched my heart for a single shred of regret, a lingering ache for the father who was headed to a federal penitentiary, or the mother who would be homeless by Friday. There was absolutely nothing. The hollow, desperate craving for their approval that had governed my entire youth had been surgically extracted. In its place bloomed a profound, overwhelmingly powerful sense of peace. It was a well-deserved tranquility bought and paid for with years of enduring their cruelty and funded by the financial independence they had mocked. I shifted the car into drive and pulled smoothly out of the country club gates, leaving the Washington dynasty in the rearview mirror forever. The next 60 days passed in a relentless, highly publicized blur of legal proceedings and media frenzies. The spectacular collapse of Marcus Washington dominated local and national news cycles. Federal prosecutors unearthed a staggering web of offshore accounts, forged trust documents, and predatory investment schemes that far exceeded even my initial discoveries. Connor, desperate to avoid a maximum sentence, immediately turned state evidence, providing prosecutors with thousands of pages of incriminating internal emails. His cowardly betrayal only deepened the public spectacle, completely severing whatever fragile bond remained between him and the disgraced patriarch. Beatrice and Chloe vanished from the public eye with startling speed. True to my word, I strictly enforced the strict legal eviction notice. The local department supervised their unceremonious departure from the mansion, watching as my mother and sister loaded a rented moving truck with whatever personal belongings the government had not already frozen. Their elite friends entirely abandoned them, refusing to answer their desperate phone calls or offer them temporary shelter. I sold the massive estate 3 weeks later to a real estate developer who planned to bulldoze the property and build modern luxury townhomes, completely erasing the physical footprint of that fraudulent family history. My own life expanded exponentially. Freed from the toxic gravity of strict parental expectations, my software consulting firm secured 3 major international contracts, doubling our annual revenue in a single quarter. I moved into a stunning penthouse apartment overlooking the city skyline, a tangible reward for the silent, grueling hours I had spent building my career while they squandered their stolen wealth. I was thriving, utterly detached from the legal nightmare consuming the people who shared my last name. But the final chapter of their reckoning had not yet been fully written. The warm, humid air of late August hung heavy over the bustling city as I calmly walked up the wide concrete steps of the federal courthouse. Armed security guards checked my official identification and nodded respectfully as I passed through the tall metal detectors heading toward the main elevators. Today was the highly anticipated final criminal sentencing hearing. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung open to reveal a space packed tight with local journalists, curious legal clerks, and former victims of the Washington family financial schemes. I took a seat in the second row, smoothing the skirt of my tailored suit, completely ignoring the frantic whispering that erupted as I entered. At the defense table, Connor and Marcus sat miles apart, separated by their respective legal teams, and a palpable toxic wave of mutual hatred. Connor looked practically unrecognizable. His trademark arrogant smirk had been entirely replaced by a nervous twitching jaw, and his expensive tailored suits had been traded for an oversized drab olive jumpsuit. Marcus sat rigidly staring straight ahead at the judge's empty bench, his graying hair unkempt and his skin carrying a sickly sallow pallor. There was no grand trial, no drawn-out legal theater to entertain the hungry press. The mountain of encrypted forensic evidence I had handed over to the FBI prosecutors left absolutely no room for debate, negotiation, or reasonable doubt. The digital footprint was bulletproof, and the prosecution had effectively dismantled the Washington Empire in record time. Judge Harrison entered the room, his black robes billowing slightly as he took his seat and slammed his heavy wooden gavel against the sounding block. He did not waste time with pleasantries or prolonged lectures. He addressed Connor first, his voice echoing with absolute judicial authority. Despite Connor choosing to turn state evidence and practically handing the prosecution a neatly wrapped confession to avoid a maximum sentence, the sheer scale of the financial devastation he orchestrated demanded a severe reckoning. The judge noted the blatant theft from vulnerable retirement portfolios, the sophisticated offshore laundering, and the malicious intent to ruin my life as a scapegoat. The judge stared down at him with undisguised contempt, highlighting how Connor had exploited his own family ties and professional position to line his pockets. Connor stood on trembling legs, openly weeping, as Judge Harrison handed down a firm, non-negotiable sentence of 7 years in a federal penitentiary. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut around his wrists echoed sharply through the silent courtroom as U.S. Marshals immediately escorted him toward the holding cells. He did not even look at his father-in-law as he was led away. Then it was my father's turn to face the music. Marcus stood up slowly, leaning heavily on the defense table for physical support. His elite legal team had spent the last 2 months desperately negotiating a plea agreement, fully aware that a jury trial would absolutely result in him spending the rest of his natural life behind bars. To avoid dying in a federal prison cell, the once untouchable patriarch of Atlanta high society had been forced to agree to terms so devastating, they effectively erased him from existence. Judge Harrison read the conditions aloud, his voice steady and unrelenting. Marcus was permanently stripped of all his corporate business licenses and barred from ever holding an executive board position again. Furthermore, the federal government had officially seized every last cent of his remaining wealth, liquidating his assets, freezing his domestic accounts, and ordering him to pay a staggering $20 million in victim restitution. The judge made it abundantly clear that Marcus would be monitored for the rest of his life. His wages garnished, his movements tracked. He was avoiding a prison cell, but he was walking out of that courtroom, a completely broken, destitute man, with a permanent felony record and a debt he could never possibly repay. His legacy was ashes. I did not stay to watch my father sign the final forfeiture documents. I stood up quietly and slipped out the heavy oak doors, the thick carpet muffling my footsteps as I stepped into the brightly lit corridor. The profound sense of closure I felt was a physical weight lifting off my chest. I had successfully protected my future, exposed their crimes, and watched the justice system execute a flawless correction of decades of abuse. The peace that washed over me was absolute and deeply satisfying. But as I turned the corner toward the main bank of elevators, a sudden, desperate movement caught my peripheral vision. Beatrice and Chloe stepped out from behind a marble pillar, physically blocking my path to the exit. The visual transformation of my mother and sister was genuinely shocking. Beatrice was wearing a wrinkled, out-of-season blouse, her blonde roots showing starkly against her unstyled hair. Chloe looked equally disheveled, her designer handbag replaced by a cheap canvas tote, her face devoid of the expensive cosmetics she usually hid behind. They looked exhausted, entirely broken, and dangerously desperate. "Maya, please just wait 1 second," Beatrice pleaded, her voice lacking any of its former aristocratic bite. She took a step closer, her hands outstretched in a pathetic, pleading gesture. "We have absolutely nothing left. The government took the cars, the bank accounts, the jewelry. Chloe and I have been sleeping on an air mattress in a cheap motel by the interstate because no one in our entire social circle will even return a phone call. We are completely out of money, Maya. You just watched them destroy your father in there. Is that not enough revenge for you? We are your family, and we are begging you for a second chance. You have millions now. You have your own company. You can afford to help us get back on our feet." Chloe nodded frantically beside her, tears welling in her eyes, abandoning the haughty superiority she had weaponized against me since childhood. "I will work for you, Maya," Chloe chimed in, her voice shaking with forced humility. "I will do data entry, I will answer phones, I will clean your new office. Just please let us move into your guest room. Let us start over. You proved your point, you won, but you cannot just leave your mother and sister to live on the streets. You are a good person, Maya. You are better than this. Do not turn your back on us when we are at rock bottom." They stood there blocking my path to the elevators, deploying the very last weapon they had in their arsenal, desperately attempting to weaponize my own empathy against me. Beatrice reached out her trembling fingers, attempting to grasp my arm in a show of desperate maternal affection. "Maya, please." She whimpered, tears cutting through the powdery residue of her cheap drugstore foundation. "Family is family. At the end of the day, blood is thicker than water. We have made terrible mistakes, but we are your flesh and blood. You cannot simply abandon your own mother and sister when we are suffering so deeply." I looked at her hand, hovering just inches from my sleeve, and let out a short, hollow laugh. The sheer audacity of her invoking family loyalty after decades of treating me like an unwanted employee was breathtaking. "You do not get to use that word," I replied, my voice slicing through the quiet corridor like a scalpel. "You never treated me like family, Beatrice. You treated me like a disappointing accessory that did not fit your curated high society aesthetic. You were so obsessed with maintaining a fake image of pristine, untouchable wealth that you gladly sacrificed the only daughter who actually cared about your genuine well-being." Chloe crossed her arms defensively, her lower lip trembling as she tried to muster a fraction of her former haughty attitude. "We are still your family," Chloe muttered, though her voice lacked any real conviction. "No, you are not," I countered, locking eyes with my sister before turning my relentless gaze back to my mother. "You both made your priorities crystal clear the moment Connor stepped into this family. You were absolutely mesmerized by him. You worshipped the ground he walked on because he was the perfect aristocratic, wealthy white son-in-law you always dreamed of parading around the country club. You thought his manufactured pedigree would somehow elevate your own social standing. You blindly handed him the keys to your entire financial future, deliberately ignoring my warnings because his country club membership and his arrogant smile were more important to you than my financial expertise. You traded your actual family for a fraudulent country club aesthetic, and it cost you absolutely everything." Beatrice visibly flinched, the undeniable truth of my words striking her like a physical blow. She knew I was right. She had fawned over Connor endlessly, comparing his supposed generational wealth to my hard-earned corporate salary, treating him like the golden goose while treating me like the ugly duckling. She had allowed him to walk all over me, completely enabling the very fraud that had just landed her husband in a federal courtroom. "Fine," Beatrice choked out her voice, dropping the maternal act and reverting to a tone of desperate transactional greed. "You made your point. You were right and we were wrong. But you still control Nana Josephine's trust. The federal government did not touch that money because you secured it. Just give us our legal half. Give us what we are owed from my mother's estate so we can get out of that disgusting motel and find a decent place to live. We will never bother you again." A slow, genuinely satisfied smile spread across my face. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the final, definitive stroke that would sever their greedy attachment to me forever. "You really think I would leave a single cent of Nana Josephine's legacy accessible to either of you?" I asked, watching the color rapidly drain from both of their faces. Nana built her fortune through decades of relentless hard work, sweat, and unquestionable integrity. She despised your shallow social climbing, Beatrice. She knew exactly what you would do with her money the moment she passed away. I opened my leather briefcase and pulled out a crisp, heavy folder containing the final financial transfer documents. I did not hand it to them. I merely held it up so they could see the bold legal letterhead. As the sole executor and primary beneficiary of the trust, I had complete legal authority to manage the assets as I saw fit. Yesterday afternoon, I fully liquidated the remaining capital in the trust. Every single dollar, every stock portfolio, every piece of real estate. Chloe gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "What did you do with our money?" she shrieked, panic pitching her voice into a hysterical squeal. "It was never your money," I corrected sharply. "And now it belongs to the Josephine Washington Foundation." I moved the entirety of the liquidated assets into a fully funded, irrevocable charitable trust. The foundation is dedicated to providing grants and zero-interest business loans to underprivileged minority women starting their own companies. Nana's legacy will actually be used to build people up, rather than funding your pathetic, superficial shopping sprees. Beatrice stared at me, her eyes wide with a horrifying dawn-like realization. Irrevocable, she breathed the words stumbling out of her mouth as if it were coated in poison. Completely irrevocable, I confirmed, ensuring my tone conveyed absolute, undeniable finality. The paperwork is filed, the accounts are sealed, and the board of directors is already reviewing the first round of grant applications. The money is legally untouchable. You cannot sue me for it. You cannot contest it. You and Chloe will never see a single dime of Nana Josephine's fortune ever again. The finality of the statement struck Beatrice with the force of a freight train. Her knees buckled slightly, forcing her to lean heavily against the cool marble wall of the courthouse hallway to keep from collapsing entirely. The last shred of her manufactured reality had just been mercilessly ripped away. There would be no miraculous financial rescue. There would be no quiet return to the elite social circles she so desperately worshipped. The sprawling mansions, the catered galas, the designer wardrobes, and the fawning country club staff were gone forever. She looked down at her scuffed shoes, the reality of her immediate future finally settling into her bones. She was going to have to leave this courthouse and return to a damp, run-down apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. She was going to have to figure out how to pay for cheap groceries, how to navigate public transportation, and how to survive in a world where her last name no longer commanded respect or opened any doors. She was entirely cut off, destitute, and completely invisible to the high society that had once defined her entire existence. I did not offer a parting word of sympathy. I simply turned my back on their weeping forms, pressed the glowing button for the elevator, and stepped inside as the heavy metal doors slid open. I watched their devastated, broken faces disappear behind the closing steel panels, finally closing the book on a family that had never truly been mine. The flight back to Chicago that late evening felt completely different than any journey I had ever taken before. For the first time in my entire life, I was returning home without carrying the suffocating baggage of the Washington family expectations. I sat by the window of the first-class cabin, silently watching the sprawling grid of city lights emerge below me, and realized the deep, persistent knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest for decades was completely gone. I had not just survived their relentless emotional abuse, I had meticulously dismantled the very foundation of their power and reclaimed my own narrative. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, invigorating breeze coming off Lake Michigan. I walked into the downtown headquarters of my forensic accounting firm with a renewed sense of purpose. The office was buzzing with electric-focused energy. My team of brilliant hand-picked analysts and investigators were already hard at work dissecting complex financial discrepancies for some of the largest corporate clients in the country. We had just secured a massive contract with a multinational banking conglomerate to overhaul their internal compliance protocols, effectively cementing my firm as the premier financial consulting agency in the Midwest. The sterile, quiet cubicle I used to occupy as a junior accountant felt like a lifetime ago. I now commanded a sprawling corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows, a tangible testament to the grueling hours and relentless dedication I had poured into my career, while my family busied themselves tearing me down. My professional success was fulfilling, but my true passion project operated on a deeper personal level. The Josephine Washington Foundation was officially up and running, and the impact was already exceeding my wildest expectations. I spent lunch breaks reviewing grant applications and scholarship essays from brilliant, ambitious young women who reminded me of myself at that age. Nana Josephine had always believed in the transformative power of education, and I was determined to honor her legacy by breaking down the exact barriers that had once held me back. The foundation was fully funding comprehensive full-ride scholarships for young African American women pursuing advanced degrees in science, technology, engineering, and finance. We were covering tuition, housing, and providing robust mentorship programs to ensure these women had the support system they needed to thrive in male-dominated industries. I was creating an army of educated, financially literate women who would never have to depend on a toxic family structure for survival. Every time I signed an approval letter transferring reclaimed funds to a deserving student, I felt Nana Josephine smiling down at me. Her hard-earned wealth was finally being used to build generational power rather than funding performative luxury. While I was busy building futures in Chicago, the reality of my former family and their new existence in Atlanta was playing out exactly as I had predicted. The high society they had so desperately worshipped had completely exiled them with ruthless efficiency. Marcus and Beatrice were ultimate pariahs. They could not even show their faces at the prestigious Sunday church services they used to dominate. The congregation filled with former friends and business associates who had lost money in the investment schemes made it abundantly clear that the Washingtons were no longer welcome in the pews. Beatrice, who had once prided herself on hosting the most exclusive charity galas in the state, now spent her days confined to a tiny, poorly insulated two-bedroom apartment situated next to a noisy highway overpass. She had no maids to scream at, no personal chefs to critique, and absolutely no social standing to weaponize against others. Chloe and her glamorous influencer lifestyle had crashed into the harsh pavement of the working class. The boutique branding agencies and luxury sponsors had permanently blacklisted her name. Without stolen money to subsidize her lavish facade, the bank had repossessed her luxury condo and her imported sports car. She was forced to move into the cramped apartment with our parents, a claustrophobic living situation that inevitably bred constant, bitter arguments. I learned through a mutual acquaintance that Chloe had eventually filled out the application I handed her in the ballroom. She was currently working the late-night drive-through shift at a local fast food franchise. The girl who used to mock my sensible work clothes was now forced to wear a polyester uniform and a greasy visor, handing out paper bags of fries to teenagers who used to follow her on social media. She was clocking in scrubbing deep fryers and earning minimum wage, experiencing the grueling reality of the labor force she had spent her entire life looking down upon with such absolute arrogant disdain. Connor and his ultimate fate was arguably the most desolate. He was currently serving his 7-year sentence in a medium-security federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania. The handsome, charming golden boy was now just another inmate in a drab uniform stripped of his country club membership and unearned sense of superiority. Chloe had filed for divorce the moment his assets were seized, abandoning him with the same ruthless self-interest he had always displayed. His wealthy parents, horrified by the public scandal and the stain on their pristine reputation, had formally cut off all contact. He sat in his cell day after day, completely isolated, having traded his entire future for a few years of stolen luxury. I poured a steaming cup of dark roast coffee and stood by my corner office window, peacefully watching the busy Chicago streets below. My life was finally my own, entirely free of their judgment and toxic drama. I turned back to my desk to eagerly review the next batch of scholarship applications when my personal cell phone vibrated sharply against the polished wood. I picked it up, my brow furrowing deeply as a new message notification suddenly appeared on the bright screen from an unknown number. I swiped the screen open and the text read, "Maya, it's Mom. Please." The glowing pixels of the short, desperate message illuminated the quiet space of my corner office. A few years ago, a text exactly like that would have sent my heart hammering frantically against my ribs in a state of sheer panic. I would have immediately spiraled into a toxic cycle of guilt, anxiety, and a desperate need to fix whatever catastrophe had befallen the Washington matriarch. I would have abandoned my own pressing deadlines, drained my own bank accounts, and raced back to Atlanta to eagerly play the role of the loyal, dutiful daughter, hoping against all rational logic that this time my profound sacrifice would finally earn me a scrap of genuine maternal affection. But as I stared at the 3 pathetic words hovering on my screen, I waited for that familiar, suffocating wave of familial obligation to wash over me. I waited for the sharp sting of pity or the hot, burning rush of vindictive anger to cloud my judgment. Absolutely nothing came. The emotional well that had once been overflowing with a desperate craving for my mother's validation was completely and irrevocably dry. My pulse remained perfectly steady. My breathing was slow and even. The woman on the other end of that cellular connection was no longer the terrifying, omnipotent authority figure who had dictated my self-worth for 3 decades. She was merely a stranger who had made a series of arrogant, malicious choices and was currently experiencing the harsh, inevitable consequences of her own actions. The psychological chains that had bound me to Beatrice Washington and her toxic, superficial empire were permanently broken. I felt a profound, beautiful, absolute indifference. My thumb hovered over the screen for a fraction of a second before moving with deliberate, unhesitating precision. I tapped the contact information, selected the option to block the unknown number, and firmly swiped left to delete the entire thread. The message vanished into the digital void, completely erased from my device, and my reality leaving behind a clean, pristine screen. I set the phone face down on the polished mahogany surface of my desk and exhaled a long, deeply satisfying breath. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and let my gaze wander slowly around the magnificent space I had meticulously created. The late afternoon sun was casting a warm golden glow across the expansive Chicago skyline, reflecting brilliantly off the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse office. The sleek, modern architecture and tasteful, understated decor were a direct manifestation of my own mind. There were no gaudy chandeliers, no inherited antiques, no desperate attempts to project a false narrative of generational wealth. Every single item in this room, from the state-of-the-art encrypted servers humming quietly in the adjacent tech bay to the framed forensic accounting awards displayed proudly on the wall, had been earned through my own brilliance, grit, and unwavering dedication. I had built a multi-million-dollar consulting empire and a life-changing philanthropic foundation entirely from scratch. Through the Josephine Washington Foundation, my team and I were currently funding full-ride scholarships for over 50 brilliant young African American women pursuing advanced degrees in STEM and finance. We were providing them with the exact mentorship, financial resources, and unyielding support that I had been denied, ensuring they would never have to depend on a toxic, manipulative environment for their survival. I was changing lives utilizing the exact same analytical skills my family had spent my entire life relentlessly mocking. A soft, rhythmic chime from my desktop calendar gently interrupted the quiet tranquility of the room. I glanced at the digital clock displayed on the monitor. It was exactly 5 in the evening, officially marking the end of the workday and the beginning of a highly anticipated celebration. Today was my 34th birthday. It was the very first birthday I would be celebrating entirely free from the suffocating shadow of my biological family. There would be no backhanded compliments from Chloe about my outfit. There would be no dismissive, condescending sighs from Marcus regarding my career choices. There would be no passive-aggressive remarks from Beatrice about how I needed to lose weight or find a wealthy husband to validate my existence. I stood up, smoothing the tailored fabric of my emerald green sheath dress, and gathered my belongings. I slipped my encrypted tablet into my leather briefcase, powered down my workstation, and walked confidently out of the office. The bustling bullpen outside was already winding down for the evening, but the atmosphere was light, vibrant, and filled with genuine camaraderie. My lead investigators and senior analysts smiled warmly as I passed, calling out cheerful birthday wishes and promising to see me at the venue later. This was the corporate culture I had cultivated, a team built on mutual respect, intellectual rigor, and actual support. I took the private elevator down to the lobby and stepped out into the vibrant, energetic pulse of downtown Chicago. A sleek town car was already waiting at the curb to whisk me away to an exclusive, intimate rooftop restaurant in the West Loop. When the hostess guided me to the private dining terrace, a chorus of genuine, enthusiastic cheers erupted from the long table. My chosen family was waiting for me. Linda, my fierce and brilliant chief operating officer, immediately pulled me into a tight, warm hug. Sarah, my oldest friend from college who had flown in specifically for the weekend, thrust a glass of vintage champagne into my hand with a radiant, joyful smile. Several close colleagues, trusted mentors, and women who had stood by me through the darkest days of the federal investigation were all gathered around the table, their faces glowing with authentic happiness and undeniable love. I took my seat at the head of the table, surrounded by the beautiful, intoxicating hum of rich conversation and genuine laughter. As I looked around at the brilliant, supportive people who had chosen to be in my life, the stark contrast to the sterile, terrifyingly superficial dinners of my past was overwhelmingly profound. No one here was demanding that I shrink myself to accommodate their fragile egos. No one was quietly assessing my financial utility or mocking my ambition. They were celebrating my presence, honoring my success, and valuing me exactly as I was. I raised my champagne flute to meet the clinking glasses of my chosen family, taking a slow, deeply satisfying sip. The toxic, fraudulent dynasty of the Washington family was dead and buried, but my life built on truth, resilience, and hard-earned brilliance was just beginning. It was the ultimate, absolute, and perfectly satisfying peace.